Hello and good evening. Welcome back to Imperial Obituary, The Mysterious Death of the British Empire by Richard Hilton. And today we are on chapter. Last time, we covered Clive of India and early British expansion in the Bengal region of India, which would lead to further expansion across the subcontinent in future generations. We focused on Clive, who we saw use um, quite Machiavellian tactics to achieve uh, um, a positive British outcome. So last time, because I'm joined by Connor. Hello, Connor. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. So last time, Connor, you had to go for the second half of the stream, or set the latter part of the stream. But I had Iron Duke with me, and just to give you the lowdown, Connor, which I imagine you probably have already seen or know a bit about it, but the in the end, Clive, who is recruited by the East India Company as effectively as an administrator out there, and he takes up more of a militaristic role. And this culminates when you have a rogue Maharaja who is being funded and supported by the French in the Bengal region, and has captured a British a company fortification. Britain is under threat in the region, and it's not looking good. And effectively, what he does is he um, goes behind the back of the company to contact a one of this rogue Maharaja's vassal, um, who is unhappy that he finds out through nefarious back channels, is unhappy with the Maharaja's rule. And so he makes a secret deal with this other Indian vassal of his, um, to basically turn on him uh, in battle, and then he could take his master's place as a Maharaja, of course, under British um, governance, East Company governance and guidance. And it all works out. Clive went as far as to forge a signature of a admiral, which back then would have been a capital offence. I mean, half the stuff he did would have been a capital offence, but the fact of the matter is, it all went right, and everyone benefited. It was, I guess, overlooked. Um, And so, I mean, yeah, that is a quick summary of what happened. And Britain maintained it. Under Clive, he managed to garner territorial expansion and trade with other Maharajas along the east coast. And of course, the next stage would be the wealthy region of what's known as Hindustan. So that's like northern India, Delhi, the most populated area of India today, would be opened up for further company expansion, at the uh, cost of French and Dutch and others, who would, especially the French, who would see a decline at the expense of all this.
All right.
So I will read this bit. So this is chapter 6, and this is expansion and consolidation. So the after Clive, effectively what this, if I'm correct, Connor, that this chapter is going to be focusing on Britain's consolidation within North America and the West Indies, and then of course the expansion in the Cape Colony, in uh, and the discovery and the settlements in Australia, New Zealand, and so on. So this is it's slowly coming into shape of the British Empire at its peak, we're getting to that point. Um, and well, to be absolutely, we're coming up to Napoleonic conflict, so we're getting there, as they say.
Yep.
All right. So of course, Connor, if you got anything, if anyone in chat's got anything, post it in chat. Connor, if you when I'm reading, if you want, I'll stop at the end of each page to give us a chance to um comment on anything, or if anything's interested at all. Hello there, Trickawoo. Hello there. Welcome to the stream. So without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 6: Expansion and Consolidation. The 7 Years' Wars may justifiably be called the foundation stone of the British Empire. Clive and Wolfe were its two principal founders. One secured India and the other Canada. Both these great lands had yet to be moulded into nations under the British Crown. Both were threatened, at least once again, by external enemies: India by Napoleon's intrigues, and Tipu Sultan and his ambitious scheme for an invasion overland from Egypt. Canada, during the final years of the Napoleonic struggle, when Great Britain was fully occupied in her fight for the freedom of Europe, was threatened by an American attempt to annex a stab in the sorry attempt to annex. Uh,
Annexation.
oh yeah, sorry, I don't know. Sorry, the page cut out for me a bit here. Have I scroll? Okay, that's sorry. I'd scrolled across everyone. Was threatened by an American attempt at annexation, a stab in the back for Britain, if ever there was one. But neither of these threats came anywhere near to reversing the results achieved in the 7 Years' Wars. Napoleon's plan um, was wrecked by Nelson in the Battle of the Nile, leaving Tippoo to fight on without French help to his inevitable defeat. The only important result of the French thrust eastwards was to bring about the spread of the British Empire to Africa. For the threat to India caused British strategy to concern itself more closely than before with the two ends of Africa round which passed the routes from France to the east, namely Egypt and the Cape of Good Hope. That is South Africa, for people who may not know. Uh, the establishment of British influence at these points led gradually to Cecil Rhodes's dream of a all-red Cape to Cairo land route, a dream which was brought to reality for a very short while when the ex-German colonies of, well, basically Tanzania and passed into British hands as a mandate of the League of Nations. As to the American attempt on Canada in 1812, this was part of a wave of imperialistic jingoism that swept across the United States in the early 19th century. The slogan of Manifest Destiny, meaning an alleged manifest destiny to rule the whole of North America, was used as a pretext for invading Florida and forcing Spain to sell that territory. The same slogan excused the later expulsion of Mexico from Texas and all territories north of the Rio Grande. It was also deemed just a justification for an almost complete extermination of Redskins in the Middle West. But when the idea from when the same idea was applied to Canada, the Americans met with a rebuff. So, do you have anything to add to this point at all?
Americans, we do love our manifest destiny. That's not gone away. It still exists, and has been always very strong. Um, but I would say you guys kind of gave it to us.
I do actually, because Connor, as some of you, of course I'm a poet at heart. I love poetry. And I'm my knowledge of Manifest Destiny is usually in contemporary poets at the time, the people who romanticized well, first it was like your trappers, your frontiersmen, right? So probably um just around the time of the 1812 war, maybe bit afterwards, and then of course you got your cowboys and the what happened just before and after and during and after the Civil War, so a bit later. But what is the essence of Manifest Destiny? Because a lot of the people, especially the northern, the Yankee types, is that this is basically, and this is a new nation. This is a new this new virgin land where there's no monarchs, there's no history, there's no connection with Europe and its terrible wars and conflict. This is like a clean slate, new start. Um, and this is a running theme that I've seen some criticize that concept of manifest destiny, but also some who embrace it as a moral good. And I'm I just think of like uh uh Robinson Jeffers or someone like that, and in some ways it sounds like quite like I don't sound like a, but it sounds like quite utopian and like sort of what sort of like a modern wokey would come up with, like a sort of utopian vision, if I was to put it that way, or some sort of socialist would some sort of socialist vision.
I think it's certainly the similarities. I think the best comparison of the modern politics is just it brought about what we know as sort of the neocon evangelical um, attachment with Israel, I would say, because it basically was the premise that America was going to be a new Israel, city on a hill.
Yeah, and you see it, and actually, I don't think this isn't referenced in the book, but one point to also is that this coincided with, of course, what was it, they call it the Great Awakening, where you had diverging Protestant beliefs and the rise of like Mormonism and all those sorts of funny American religions, which or sects of, well, I know you would disagree that there's some of them are Christian, but certain sects, let's say, of these movements, which are very much explicit, they're almost like an American cult. I when I look at them, and there are some that, like, I mean, I met a few Mormons in where I live, because you do have Mormons that come to UK. Um, and when I sort of look at them, the aesthetics and what their understanding of their texts, let's say, their religious texts, it is kind of like what Shintoism is, like a religion, like a that sort of worships Japan and the essence of Japan. I find Mormonism like the essence of Manifest Destiny North America. Does that make sense?
I feel like it would make more sense if Americans liked the Mormons, especially in that time frame.
Oh well, yes, but that's my. I mean, you do have like then you have. I mean, what the reason why I use the Mormons as an example is them the most extreme version of that. Okay, then you have like evangelicals who have this, as we've seen recently, they have this unhealthy fanatical devotion to Israel. Which again, Connor, you're a man who is deep in theological thought and study. Answer me this: from my understanding of my limited understanding of the Bible, but it is an understanding that the old covenant between his God's chosen people it no longer valid. Basically, there's a new covenant.
Well,
If
I think the best
it,
word to say is fulfilled. It's
okay,
fulfilled in the new covenant.
okay, so then the Jews and the Israelis can't be the chosen people, then can they? That because that would be my question to the evangelicals. Like, what is their when if they're confront? Because I imagine they've been confronted with that argument before. Um,
Well, I think the best way to describe it is, from a theological perspective, that is that they are i- they are the chosen people, but they have declined God's favor.
well, that's my point then. So they can't be the chosen people then.
Well, no, I'm saying just like if I chose you, right, and you said I don't want anything to do with you, you'd still be my chosen person. Do you
Right.
understand what I'm saying? Like you just
Okay.
you could hate me and despise me, but I still chose you. But you despise me, and you've disconnected yourself from me, and you're
See,
not saved or anything.
but you see, then my counter at that wouldn't. I mean, I'm guessing the early, well, the early Christians would the argument would be, well, we are actually the chosen people, and these people, the Jews, aren't the real. They're not the real ones, and
Well,
and and w- and the scriptures are the ones that talk about us, not them. You see, that's how logic, like I would sort of perceive it.
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that the Christians are the chosen people. I'm just saying that the Jews still have that, like, history. It's just they have abandoned it. They're basically like apostates.
Okay, so okay, now we get okay, so they've rejected it. And so this okay, so they're apostates. Now, the, so from my understanding from the evangelicals is the reason why there's this huge okay, not talking the American government and their reasons, but on the ground level, the evangelicals why they are so fanatically Zionist um is because they believe that if all the Jews are in Israel, it could usher in the second coming
Yeah,
or
I
the
think they also
apocalypse.
like evangelicals want the Jews to be able to rebuild their temple, if I'm not mistaken, which God has always prevented. So it's very strange, but yeah, they think God, or they think Jesus will return if um it, that the Jews need to be in Israel in order for Jesus to return, and that they want to bring that about sooner, which I think, if is a weird idea because people don't generally want the apocalypse to come. Like I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in the apocalypse.
I just don't understand how they're Christian though. I'm okay. I know the response would be, well, AI, they're not from my point, but
Well, evangelicals are. They believe in the Trinity. Mormons aren't Christian, but uh they're like evangelicals just have really bad theology. They're heretical, but they're just really misguided. It's not like I mean, from a theological perspective, they're not saying like the Jews are like we're not worshiping the Jews, though you might make that argument. I would say that what they're doing is they think they're trying to fulfill prophecy, which I think is ridiculous because it's not a prophecy. That's not part of prophecy. Israel is no longer exists. Well, in the same way as we think of it, Israel is the church.
I mean, also by if they're trying to manufacture this, which is basically what it is manufacture a second coming. Isn't that on par with deceiving God for to create a divine event?
It's definitely trying to manipulate God, I'd say.
And as biblical history has shown, if you try to manipulate or lie to God, it doesn't usually end well. um,
I did,
so
they're not very bright. Let's just say that.
well, anyway, we're getting a bit sidetracked here with that, but you know what? I would love when this is all over, for you and me to do like a live stream on like each Protestant and like Mormon sect and everything.
I think we
Just
need
like
we need Cringe Walker for that too.
yeah, we need maybe even Ryan Turnip Seed as well. Like
Oh,
just do
a
like a
Lutheran.
Yeah, yeah. I think, or maybe Radlib, or because someone who might know a bit more about the sort of Luther to get his perspective on it, because I think one of them, their like parents were Moonies or something like that, so they're maybe there was like sort of like,
What? Moonies?
yeah, it was like some hippie Protestant
Oh,
social movement in the 60s and 70s. Um,
yikes.
I mean, yeah, I mean, didn't last long, but you know. Anyway, so yeah, let's get back to it.
Oh, but also
Um,
I don't like Manifest Destiny. I think it's dumb.
it's kind of, well, okay. So where I disagree with Richard Hilton here is, um, if the American justification is, um, we see land, we like land, we kill off all the Indians, now this is our land. I would say like what Russia did when they were expanding eastward. I'd be like base, 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 go ahead. But then they had to justify it with like sort of lame and liberal reasons. It's kind of cringe. I
Well,
mean, it just feels kind of cringe to me, even though that there probably was like, if I was to be absolutely honest, like the frontiers people, from my reading of the frontiers people, were definitely not cringe and definitely not like liberal in spirit. They were complete opposite of that.
well, the thing is, many of these tribes had already sort of, uh, I don't know, taken on a different culture. You know,
Mm.
they were no longer like as native as we might think of them.
I mean, the historically speaking, the Cherokee, which was a lot earlier, were the ones, because the British, when we were in the 13 colonies, were actively, fighting. But the I guess the most like violent tribe against like frontiers and the North American people were probably the Cherokee and the Comanche. I mean, that's why
Yes.
the Texas Rangers was set up, I believe, was because of the Comanches.
Yes. Well, the Cherokee are 18, are where we're talking. We're talking about the Trail of Tears and such as it's
Yeah,
called. But yeah, I mean that was the Cherokee moving everyone to Oklahoma.
yeah. But then when you look at like the Tecumseh and his confederation of Indians in the Dakotas, I forgot what the tribe
I thought it was in the Ohio
was, it
River Valley.
Montana or somewhere,
No, it's
or
very
Michigan, was it Michigan, sorry, was it
yeah,
Michigan?
it's Midwest. It was the Midwest.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was like
yeah.
what
I
not
forgot,
yeah.
yeah, I forgot the name of his tribe. What the tribes were, um, Sitting Bull and people like that.
Well, that's the Sioux.
The Sioux.
The
Yeah,
the Sioux were actually Christians at that point by the time of their fighting with the American government.
they were. Yeah, that was the point I was getting at, because the Sioux, and the Apache were not as. I mean, it was the Comanche ones which were particularly violent, but the Sioux, Um, you know, and it is, to be fair, Sitting Bull, I mean, he did get screwed. The government did like fuck him over. Excuse my language, but they
Yeah,
did, like they just openly like lied, and then they just came with guns. They pulled like a Ruby Ridge incident before Ruby Ridge. So
he was a Catholic actually.
yeah, yeah.
Well, because the
Um,
Spanish had been busy evangelizing all of them.
Well, before he went into the reservations, they actually, this was after Little Bighorn. They went into Canada, but the problem was in Canada is that there were other tribes, because of the location that they were allowed to settle in. The problem was that there were other tribes there which weren't very friendly to them, and
No
so
one can get along.
yeah, and so they had to settle in like a really shit area, and then because of the proximity, and I think it was winter, the decision was to, because people were being sick and everything dying, the decision was to go back across the border and into the reservation, and it was there was one sign, and this is what is kind of dark. Is there's a sign there that said that's on the American reservation in English, um, put up by the agent, as they call it, the American agent who oversees it, is no, what was it? No chiefs, no masters, all equal under God. And on the surface, you think to yourself, okay, yeah, yeah. But then you actually think of it, it's actually a real subversion and breakdown of natural hierarchy for that tribe, and is very deeply subversive. That statement, like really subversive.
Yeah. Liberalism always going taking down natives.
Yeah, and they use they use the framework of Christianity as a way to, well, to justify it, because the bit at the end there was basically to sort of deceive the mass population, thinking, oh, it's like a religious statement. Actually, no, it's more of a political statement than anything else.
What was it again? Can
Um,
you say it again?
it was something along the lines of no no masters, no chiefs,
Yeah.
um, and along that line. Um,
Also,
that
Tecumseh was a Shawnee uh, chief, and yeah, he was from Ohio, and he died in Upper Canada.
Yeah, he was him and his men were actually commissioned as in the British Army of all things, because the just as we know, I've talked about this before. It's like the greatest American cope is the 18 that then the Americans believe they won the 1812 war, and one of the arguments a lot of Americans use is, oh well, we defeated Tecumseh and we managed to gain control over like the Michigan and the territories around the lakes there, and this was like a overall win. And that is the justification, totally ignoring the idea that, well, your main your cause to go to war was to conquer North America, which you failed in, and or conquer Canada, and Britain ended up burning down um, Buffalo, the city of Buffalo, and Washington D.C. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember in school learning about it and being like told that it was a victory. I mean, the most successful thing that we learned about it was after the peace had already been signed, which was the Battle of New Orleans.
well, this is again the second part is called Battle of New Orleans. I mean, came across this after AA did that cigar stream with with a guest on the 1812 war, and that was when I wasn't arguing, but I was sort of questioning a lot of people's perceptions on the war, and I was like, well, y- the cause of the war was to conquer. Okay, let's be generous and say Lower Canada, because that's where all the armies were sort of focusing on. Montreal. And Americans did burn down Montreal. I mean, it was called Yorktown, I think. Then they renamed it Montreal afterwards. But okay, that was your target to capture and conquer, and of course that never happened. You had raids, you had
Didn't we
successful
burn
scum.
Ottawa too, or something?
Uh, I know you Montreal. I don't know about Ottawa.
Are you sure we burned down Montreal? That seems strange.
I am pretty certain that it was, because I think Ottawa was a bit too far out the way, unless I'm completely wrong, and I am thinking of Ottawa. I mean, Ottawa is closer to the state, so. Oh, now you got me second guessing myself. Hold on a sec. I can find that out quickly. Just do a good old Wikipedia search. Uh, I'm not in. Wasn't Quebec? It wasn't. Was it Ottawa?
I
Uh,
just remember always being taught that they burned down our capital, we burned the capital of, or sort of the quote unquote capital of Canada at the time, at least.
hmm. I think you're right. I think it was actually Ottawa that it was. Well, it says it was attacked. It doesn't say. I know one of the Canadian cities or towns, they were more like towns then, but was indeed burnt down. Hence why sort of Washington D.C. was a target later on. But yeah,
I think it was just the Capitol building, not like the city.
well, it was what in Washington,
No, I mean in Ottawa.
Ottawa. Yeah, could be. I mean, with Washington D.C., what it was the White House, the state capitol, and the Treasury, I believe.
I do not remember. Anyways,
And I know the men went into like the local taverns, like the privates went in the taverns and sort of ransacked the. Well, I say not ransack. They did actually pay for the. They did pay. They did pay. There's no ransacking allowed, but anyway, well, we shall continue. Loyal Canadians, whether of French stock or British, showed to no uncertain tune that they had no wish to become Americans. The attempted invasion was soundly defeated. These two adventures, sole instances of attempts by other great powers to smash the growing empire, can hardly be said to have interrupted or endangered and the lead secured by Great Britain in the 7 Years' War, a lead which continued unchallenged for a century or more. Oh, damn, he just like said, America, you did. It's not even noteworthy of history. Okay. um, for funny enough, Charles Oman has the same attitude with another British historian, Victorian British historian, with the 1812 wars. He just goes, "It's not worth mentioning. It's such a non-event." um, Anyway, from time to time, some minor frontier dispute arose, such as the Herat and the Penja instance with Russia, the Fashto crisis with France, or the Venezuela dispute with the United States. But these and many similar storms in a teacup were settled diplomatically without war between big powers concerned. For many years, Great Britain was tactically accepted as the leading colonial power in most parts of the world except Central and Southern America. Vaguely defined, but nonetheless recognized spheres of influence covered much of Southern Asia, Australasia, Oceania, and the eastern and southern parts of Africa. The Indian Ocean and its offshoots, the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, became strategically British lakes. Innumerable Asiatic and African potentates came to accept the protection of Great Britain, which meant that although these minor rulers exercised complete authority within their own domains, they were precluded from direct dealings without any great power other than the British. It must not, however, be thought that these long years of almost unchallenged colonial development were years of peace for the mother country. Far from it. The balance of power still had to be maintained in Europe itself and later in the borders of a dying Ottoman Empire. the titanic struggle known as the Napoleonic Wars, which last which lasted from the French Revolution in 1793 to the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, with only one brief spurious truce in 1802, uh, more than once brought Great Britain and her allies to the brink of defeat. The Crimean War of 1854 was the only clash which involved British troops in a inter-European struggle between Waterloo and Mons. Though not a major war by Napoleonic or 20th century standards, the Crimean War was in fact a struggle for the maintenance of balance of power, whose fulcrum had by this time shifted from Central Europe to the Near East. If proof be needed that Great Britain, from the Years' War right onward almost to 1914, was able to proceed almost undisturbed disturbed by other great power rivals, with the expansion, development, and consolidation of her empire. Such a proof may be found in the voyages of Captain James Cook, the explorer between 1763 and 1779, and the subsequent opening of the Pacific and South Antarctic Oceans to trade and normal activities. Cook's three voyages covered a period just after the Seven Years' War and a time when the War of American Independence was in full swing. So, Connor, do you have anything to add on that passage there?
Well, I made me think of the fact that I kind of wish that what Churchill wanted to do to the Soviet Union was done to America. Do you remember what that is?
Remind me again.
Uh,
What was his plan with it? What hand?
Kill it in the cradle.
Oh, right.
That would have been nice. I think I'd be more happy if that had happened.
I think, to be honest, given like the passage and everything, Britain, I think for a while there was no serious any European power that took America as a serious country, because it was, inward looking. It was wrestling control with primitive tribals on their frontier. I mean, let's be honest, and ex ex Spanish colonies in the south. So I guess there was no real consideration that America could arise to become a world power or threat.
Yeah, that's my
And
concern. That's why I'm like, it's like Richard Hilton's like, the domination of the British and the
yeah,
empire, while the sleeping giant prepares itself, when you could have just, you know, finished it off when you had the chance.
I mean, America, America really went into overdrive after the Civil War. Like it really did. Like
That's
in
that's
its
sorry.
sorry,
That's
Connor.
because the only thing that everyone could agree on after the Civil War was that we want to hate everybody. We can only hate out. We can only attack people that are outside of our country, because we obviously can't agree on pretty much anything together.
I mean, it kind of feels like it was a nation like run by like spastic theory cells. I mean, to be blunt, I mean, there seems to be like this. There, there was like even from its at this point, there was a lot of like theory cells, like obsession. That this is why no one really took them seriously.
It's run by a bunch of liberals.
Yeah, fundamentally, and the
Yeah,
thing there is, there's this like there is this um you know belief, we see it today, and you see it in our circles like AA and others talk about this, is that there is this conflicting part in the mind where you have your political formula, and then you have the actual governance side of it. And with Britain, okay, Britain, they dabbled in liberalism, you know, traditionalism, what have you, conservatism, unionism, Protestant nationalism, whatever the formula it built upon itself. But at the end of the day, you had Catholic emancipation, you had things which were, and if we're absolutely honest, if you were a governance, things that they weren't obsessed with um, theory, like the actual theory of the ideology itself, because that power just operates in you can't power operates independently of theory, because this is where this is where revolutions tend to, like the French Revolution, goes off the rails, because it couldn't because it was governed by people who actually didn't weren't interested in power. They were interested in you know politics.
I think they were kind of interested in both.
Well, the thing is that you can't have you can't have a society where you're just executing people, um, you know, for where it comes down to, like, executing society where people look funny, or a neighbor accuses another neighbor of thinking this, and this is the thing, and this is why the revolutions failed. This is why Pol Pot's regime in Cambodia failed. This is why all these sorts of systems fail, is because that they aren't and this is why the Soviet Union didn't fail, because Stalin did put away the radical leftism, if we call it that, within the Bolshevik movement itself, because especially when the German invasion of Russia, it wasn't sustainable. There wasn't high enough morale. He had to concede and accept realities of how power in Russia and how it functions.
Well, it did fail Russia because it created Ukraine.
What Ukraine, in the sense of what
My
did
understanding
they?
is that it sort of created Ukrainian nationality more than anything else. The USSR did.
No, no, no. Ukrainian nationality has happened within our lifetimes, believe it or not. If you go back to what 2011, twenty
Wasn't
ten,
Ukraine was one of the Soviet republics, right?
well, yeah, that it was just, but it was just a province. It was
I'm
just
just
it
saying,
was
but that was the first Ukraine. You know what I mean? Like,
the modern conception of Ukraine that we know today as its border um happened. uh well, it was in response. You had the destabilization of the Russian Empire, you had the Civil War, you had factionalism based on ethnic lines, which is true. Um, though the first iteration of Ukraine was more Catholic than anything else. But a lot of that population, that sort of exist of what people, especially in western parts of Ukraine, has changed dramatically since the war, and also since Ukrainian nationalists. But the reason I go back to 2010 is, if you look at elections in Ukraine, you had like this two-party system. You had the effectively a pro-Russian Russophile party which dominated east, like parts of Ukraine, which are, even round Kiev. Sorry,
falling into the trap, are we?
I'm falling into the trap. I've been propagandized too much. I need to
You
break
need
the
detox.
condition. Arr! Yeah. But yeah, yeah. There were parties which were um um that dominated, the political landscape in Ukraine, which were pro-Russian. But the reason why Ukraine was split up is because when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a lot of outside pile driving on Russia, which which created a lot of within, like, traditional Russian territory. I don't include the Baltic states within that. The Baltic states were their exception because they had historically come under German civilization. So they were never really part of the Russian civilization, and they always were. But the modern Ukrainian identity, I mean, I would actually say a lot of it's been forged in the last few years during the war. If I was absolutely honest.
I mean, if you're talking about like the nation, it as a nation, yeah, you're right. But I'm just saying that it it was never create. It was a Soviet. Um, it was based on something more Soviet.
Yes, yes, that's correct.
That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that
Oh,
like it was an actual nation. It was a sort of artificial creation by the
yeah.
Soviets, and then because the Soviet Union did fail in the sense of it collapsed, then that split it off from Russia because they had made this artificial thing, and then they were like, "Yeah, now it's real."
Hot take. If Stalin was around in the 80s, I don't think it wouldn't have collapsed under Stalin.
Oh
That,
yeah,
that, that-
but
yeah, but as I was saying, Stalin,
that's
it was about the man, not again, it wasn't the party. I mean, the trouble is Stalin died, and
you're
a
just
bunch of
saying if one of the mustache men were around, think things would be different. True.
well, I mean, yeah, yeah, so,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that, I mean, yeah, um, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Well, I think we should continue because we'll be here
Yeah,
forever.
we're gonna be here forever. Yeah, I might sort of speed run through this. Um,
Maybe you should just
one
read the chapter and then we'll talk about
Okay, if I'll what I'll do is read the chapter all the way through, and then we'll comment at the end because there is a bit to this chapter. So, um, one might expect to find in his log some occasional reference to tricky encounters with privateers of France, Spain, or even the rebellious colonists, seeing that he traversed seas and explored shores of interest to all these powers. This is Captain Cook he's referring to. But throughout his narratives, there is scarcely scarcely any a mention of a war of any thought for armed encounters. The British explorer seems to have had these oceans entirely to himself. In the same way, the history of Australia and New Zealand stands out in strong contrast to the wars by which Canada and India were won for the British Empire. The antidote the antidotes do not seem to have excited the cupidity or enterprise of early merchants, whether English, French, Dutch, Spanish, or Portuguese, to nearly the same extent as did the fabulous wealth of Cathay, China, uh, or the Spice Islands, or the vaguely described Indies. In one sense, this was strange, because belief in a great southern continent was general among European geographers at a very early period. In fact, the very name Australia derives from uh, Tierra Austral de Espiritu Santo, a name given by the Spanish geographer Cuaris, who I'm butchering all these Spanish names, but just go with it, everyone. Who accompanied the explorer Torres on an expedition sent from Peru to discover um, the semi-mythical continent. Whether the Spaniards or the Dutch probing southwards from Java were the first to sight the large landmass is of little importance, for neither nation followed up the discovery. Geographers were even left in doubt as to whether the vaguely pinpointed landmass was the northern edge of a huge continent or not. The anti, antipodes seem to have left the rival empire building nations cold. In the early phase, this lack of interest may well have been due to the greater attraction of China and the Indies. America was believed to lie on the one side of the routes to the to these lands of plenty, whereas the southern continent obviously did not. But after the 7 Years' War, when Great Britain had driven her rivals from the field as far as concerned uh, North America and India, one might have thought that France and Holland, if not Spain and Portugal too, might have turned their colonizing zeal towards the um, antipodes of a co- sort of colonize con consolation prize, but they did not. Great Britain was left undisturbed, not only to extend her hold over the two big prizes of Canada and India, but also explore the rest of the hitherto unknown world and take possession of what uh, seemed worth having. Happy is the country that has no history, is an old and sometimes very true saying by this uh, Obituary, Australia and New Zealand should be happy indeed. Um, Apart from the unwise use of the former as a dumping ground for convicts in the early days, which produced the mild excitements of bushranging during the middle of the 19th century, Australian history was characterized by dogged exploration of the waterless interior, by the development of the sheep farming industry, by the brief thrills of the gold rush, and the gradual and long time mutual suspicious merging of the six original colonies into the Commonwealth of Australia. Unlike North America or India, Australia had no formal indigenous enemies to overcome by large scale colonial wars. The Aborigines of Australia, being too few in numbers and inefficiently advanced both socially and militarily to offer serious resistance to white settlement. In this respect, New Zealand was less fortunate, being inhabited by warlike Maori tribes. This discouraged Tasman in 1642 from staying ashore for very long, but Cook in 1769 was little more successful in making friends with some tribesmen. On the whole, however, the Maori acquired a reputation as ferocious cannibals, and it was not till 1814 that Marston and the other missionaries began to make progress with civilizing the Maoris. In the wake of the missionaries, settlers began to acquire land, and in 1840 an assembly of chiefs signed the Treaty of Watanga, placing themselves under the protection of Queen Victoria. They had already asked for British protection in 1833, and it must be admitted that the protection against uh, rapacious settlers was what they wanted, since they were not threatened by any other enemy. Despite the um, conscientious efforts of Grey and other colonial administrators, the quarrels over land purchase persisted and were the causes for a series of Maori wars from 1845 to 1870. Fortunately, however, these wars never reached the extreme extermination of the Maoris by the white men, as was the case as regards to redskins in the United States. New Zealand settlers finally acquired a friendly administration for the courage and the dignity with which the Maoris fought for their country, and the two races succeeded in settling down together amicably on basic and mutual respects. Spoiler alert, fast forward to the 21st century, that is not the case at the moment. Um, when one takes into account the uh, on the set when one takes into account the comparatively isolated and peaceful development of these two new nations, Australians and New Zealanders, it is very greatly indeed to their credit that their young men volunteered in thousands to help the mother country in her Boer War in the turn of the century and the two world wars, 1914 and 1939. It will be remembered that failure to do this on the part of the North American settlers during the middle 18th century was one of the roots of ill feeling which led to the American War of Independence. Turning to African colonization, we find that the situation was different, both from the um, anthropods and that of India and Canada. Africa had been well known to the Mediterranean peoples of Europe for almost the beginning of history. By the Middle Ages, it must have been known to every schoolboy in Europe that the vast black inhabited continent lay immediately to the south. That was common knowledge long before India, China, and the Americas were mere than vague rumors. Yet for centuries, Africa remained the mysterious dark continent. Um, I do want to say before I continue, Connor, that and to YouTube that there's going to then possibly maybe some certain words and phrases which isn't accepted in today's society. And I want YouTube to know that these this isn't the views represented by myself or Connor or on this channel. Um,
I'd advise just replacing them just cause.
I might if there's any like spicy gamer words, I might have
Just
to
a word that
yeah.
starts with N.
The rap artists like to use them. And it
Just
begins with N, ends in R. Yes. I might have to self censor some words, but you'll understand why. um, okay. Even the Spaniards and Portuguese who had experienced closet connections with the closest connections with Africa through the Arab occupation uh, did not do more than occupy a few forts along the coast. To Prince Henry, the navigator, and indeed the whole enterprising galaxy of seafaring explorers, Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, Danish, or English, the dark continent was just a huge obstacle that had to be circumnavigated in order to get at the real lands of plenty, the spice islands of the Indies. What little they saw of Africa as they coasted along, it cannot have seemed very inviting. What they knew of its northern hinterland, must have helped to discourage further investigation of the continent. For North America, they knew was the home of the fanatical. Um, for North America, they knew was the home of the fanatical Muslim pirates, with a gigantic desert to the south of them. Later, when development of tobacco and sugar plantations in America created demand for labor, a flourishing slave trade sprang up as one-way traffic between West Africa and the new lands across the Atlantic. This resulted in a few more forts being planted along the West American coast by Portuguese, Danes, and Dutch. Similar English installations appeared there later, but these were uh, cited for the um, worthier purpose of stopping the slave trade, or, as in Sierra Leone's case, of providing settlement for released slaves from the West Indies. To say this does not imply that the English were uh, guiltless of the slave trade. Unfortunately, in the early days, this was not the case. But Hawkins and other bold adventurers who indulged in the trade had no need of forts or shore establishments. They simply sailed into African creeks and took such human cargoes as they wanted, regardless of the Portuguese who vainly tried to claim the monopoly. The consequence of all this was that the west coast became sprinkled with small European holdings, while the east coast was left till much later as a hunting ground for the Arab slavers. The southern tip of the continent only acquired importance when the route to India became busy with Dutch shipping. Portuguese did not occupy it, but preferred to their ports of call in Angola and Mozambique, probably on the account of the foul reputation of the Cape itself for storms. It was left to the Dutch to plant a settlement there as a halfway house on their route to Java. So matters remained until Napoleon's Egyptian campaign and its exposure of French designs on India. This caused the British to occupy both Egypt and the Cape, the two extremes of Africa. Just to note that the Dutch had a mini revolution during this time period and became the Bavarian Republic, which was like a client state of the French Napoleon's France. Hence why actually these sorts of actions were taken. This caused the British to occupy both Egypt and the Cape, the two extremes of Africa, which were the sea doors to India. Subsequent annexation of the whole Nile basin and nearly all East Africa followed in due course. It is hard to discern whether this advance was inspired by the dream of Cecil Rhodes for all Red Cape to Cairo corridor, or whether a British desire to suppress the Arab slave trade played in predominant part. It is significant that General Gordon was sent to Khartoum at about the same time when Rhodes became Prime Minister of Cape Colony, and that these two were in close correspondence. Furthermore, only 10 years earlier, Livingstone had roused the conscious of Victorian England by his disclosure of Portuguese and Arab slaving methods up and down African coast and the hinterland. It is probable that the altruism and shrewd imperialistic foresight combined to bring the long strip of territory between the Nile and the Zambezi under British rule, thus linking up the two thrusts which law and order had necessitated. The one from Egypt southward to end the barbarous anarchy of the Mahdiism in the Sudan, and the other northward to subdue the warlike habits of the Matabali. In any case, no matter what may have been the urge towards conquest in East Africa, whether restoration of law and order, suppression of inhumanities, or just plain imperialism, there is no doubt whatsoever about one thing: there is no part of British Africa that did not benefit immeasurably in terms of happiness for the inhabitants from their contemporary sojourn under British administration. This is the true and entire British Empire, but in particularly applicable to the black inhabitant regions of the Dark Continent, whether absolutely no advice in civilization had been achieved at all before the coming of the white man. Not even so simple a mechanical device as the wheel had been invented by the uh, black population. Uh, in a book of this size, there cannot unfortunately be room for detailed accounts of the series of colonial wars which formed a part of the long process of imperial expansion, pacification, and consolidation between the end of the Seven Years' Wars and Jubilee of Queen Victoria in 1897. The former date marked the moment of history when the way was clear for British Empire building to begin. The Great Queen's Jubilee marked the highest peak of the achievement just before the tragic decline and dissolution set in. The history of British India alone was marked by a series of wars, first against the Maharajas of the south and centre against the well-equipped army of Mysore, then against the Rohillas and the Pindaris robber tribes who plagued the rich Ganges Junmar Valley. Later came two wars against the Sikh kingdom and the Punjab, whereby British rule came into contrast with the wild Pathan and Bulachi tribe in the northwest frontier. Even then, though the natural frontier of the Indian subcontinent had been reached, British and Indian troops had to fight three wars against Afghanistan and innumerable smaller ones against the hill tribes of the unadministrated borderlands. Misrule in Burma under her rather sadistic king, Thieu Bar, necessitated two wars against the country and her annexation to British India. This again led to small punitive expeditions against the frontier tribes more primitive than the uh, Pathans, e.g., the Nagas, Lushai, and the Boers of the northeast jungles. Northward, the unique mountain chief of the chain, sorry, the unique mountain chain of the Himalayas provides an almost perfect frontier, and in consequence, wars along the extensive stretch were rare and unimportant. The biggest in 1814 against Nepal ended decisively, but produced between British and Gurkhas such a profound mutual respect for the fighting qualities each of the other as to cement a friendship perhaps unparalleled anywhere else in the world between the soldiers of two nations. Internally, too, the military history of the growing Indian Empire included two serious military mutinies. It is significant to note that the second and the far larger outbreak in 1857, no further trouble of any kind recurred, and for the remaining period, almost a century of British administration uh, of the Indian Army. The century of contentment among the sepoys and country folk of India followed an internal war so stained as was the mutiny, with bloody deeds on both sides, gives the lie to those who slanderously describe British rule in India as a military tyranny, forcibly holding down a crowd by seething peasantry. Never before or since has a bitter and vindictive war of that kind ever been followed by so complete reconciliation. The reason for this is well worth investigations. Though a book would be needed to chronicle the turbulent military history outlined above, we can and ought to extract the and ponder the main lesson of all these wars, mutinies, and periods of peace between them. British success in winning and holding India was not due to deployment of overwhelming military force after the Russian Empire building pattern, nor was it achieving by um, by a deluge of dollars after the American pattern. In British imperial success, both in peace and war, was gained through the faithful and devoted service of a long line of conscientious men, both administrators and military commanders. It was not always so from the beginning. The early days of East India Company provided rather unsavory reading with their records of bribery, corruption, extortion, and grand scale uh, perpetrated by highly placed servants in the company. Those were the days of the Naboobs, much satirized in the literature of their time, men often of humble origin who had exploited their opportunities as officials of the company to amass immense private fortunes with which to cut a dash in England. The extenuation of these improprieties must be remembered that that their perpetrators were merely imitating the customs of the East, as practiced by the local Rajas and the rich men with whom they had to live in contact. Sorry, just got back to lost my place. In the India of those days, it was customary and honourable to give and to receive lavish presents in gratitude for favours bestowed from above. The company's servants were too poorly paid for keeping up the proper status amidst such wealth. Even Clive, in his early days, fell victim of this habit and using his official position to line his own pockets. But it was Clive who saw the evil of such system and who stamped it out. He forced the directors of the company to pay their servants in India a adequate salary, even a generous salary for those days, and then he drastically cleaned up the civil service, ruthlessly throwing out any who persisted in the old ways after or the excuse for doing uh, for so doing had ended. Thus, it was Clive who may be said to have founded not only the British Empire in India, but also the magnificent civil service on which the success of British rule depended. Some of its members in later years may uh, uh, hold on a sec. Some of its members in its later years may have developed the slightly pompous aloofness which earned from the ICS the mocking nickname of the twice born, but this taunt was applied by those outside the august service in the envious sense, but with a ungrudging admiration for men of incorruptible fairness. Some empires were simply police states. The British Empire in India was uh, typified as by the district of commissioners or collector, a solitary white man administrating territory as extensive as many a sovereign state, single-handedly except for Indian subordinates whom he himself had probably trained. A constant source of amazement to foreign globetrotters passing through remote rural districts of India used to be the thinness on the ground of the ruling race. One white man in charge of hundreds of square miles, one British battalion to every four or more Indian units, and the proportion was adopted again only a few years after the end of the bitter mutiny struggle. The high standards set by the reformed civil service soon spread into the army and other government services. Here again, it has not always been so. In the early days of the East India Company, when unrest and French hostility were compelling the English in India to raise troops for their own defence, it was not easy to secure in sufficient numbers the right type of officers to command the new sepoy units. The pay was even less than that of the company's civil administrators. The prestige of military officers in the company's service was markedly inferior to that of regular army officers. Relationship between the two armies were far more smooth or happy. Short periods of active fighting were interspersed with long periods of inactivity. The climate of southern India was not conducive to maintenance of alert minds of physical active bodies among officers who saw little prospect of high command. The opprobrious term sloth belt was applied by troops serving in the more exciting conditions of Bengal or Oda to their comrades dragging out an idle but very uh, monotonous existence down in Tram Travancore or the Carnatic. It was quite unusual in those early days for officers to bother to learn the language of the sepoys under their command. Once again, it was largely thought largely though not solely due to Clive that this state of affairs was remedied. He was the first among his contemporaries to make himself not only fluent in the vernaculars of southern India, but also to understand, as far as any European could understand, the mentality of the sepoys. When the center of military campaigning shifted from the south to Bengal and the Ganges Jumna plains, a new type of army officer rapidly took the place of the old sloth belt type. Active service in a less relaxing climate, the exciting prospect of making law and order into a semi anarchic anarchic provinces of dying Mughal Empire, and the most important change of all, the thrill of training and commanding men of the true fighting race of northern India. All these combined to put zest and profession of arms. There also commenced opportunities for keen army officers to combine the job of fighting with th- that of territorial administration. As the frontiers of British rule spread northwards, the demand for political officers and civil administrators soon outstripped the number that could be found in the civilian personnel of the company. Hence arose that the fine tradition of English administrator, typified by such men as Herbert Edwards, John Nicholson, Henry Lawrence, and his two brothers James Abbott, and in later years Colonel uh, Mac- Maxswan, Robert Sandman, and Robert Warburton, and many others. Indeed, throughout British India, the dividing line uh, between civil servant and military officer had always been flexible. Clive himself was both a soldier and administrator from his early days as a junior clerk to his governorship of Bengal. In recent times, right up to the end of British rule, it was customary for army officers with a flair for languages and for handling local populations to transfer contemporary or even permanently to the political department, which involves supervision and guidance of frontier tribes. The flexibility of combining military and administrative skills was not, in fact, confined to the officer classes. In a country where white men were thinly scattered and often working alone, times of crisis called upon planters and other non-officials to rise to the emergency. Many cases they were nobly did so. The uh, indigenous planter Venables of Asmar, finding himself the only white man in a disaffected area during the mutiny, raised a small private army of loyal Indians and upheld law and order in his district for several months unaided. In peace or war, examples abound of the moral mastery by one white man over the multitude of others. Colonel Giuseppe single-handedly quelled the Vellore mutiny in 1806 by sheer force of character, after having himself hauled upon up into the fort by belts of the besieged garrison. Nicholson almost single-handedly also won over the hostile Sikh garrison of Attock, again by his force of character. Old General Hersey, in the Mangal Pandey affair of Bakrabor, faced a mutinous battalion and dominated them by sheer will power. And perhaps the most remarkable of all example of man's moral mastery was the story of Warburton's 18 years in charge of the Khyber Pass with a walking stick on his weapon, walking stick as his with a walking stick as his only weapon. He pacified some of the world's fiercest tribesmen to such a degree that the viceroy was able to pay a ceremonial visit to that notorious defile. Oh, thank God it's coming to an end. Okay. This was the secret weapon by which the British Empire was built and administrated, not only by the crushing material strength, but by putting the right man in local charge and trusting him to do rightly. It was not due to the mere Oriental flattery that the white men in India were frequently dressed as a Gawab Parari, a protector of the poor. There were many other terms of respect in Oriental languages, flowery expressions which mean little or nothing, but this honourable title meant just what it said. Its utters felt that they were addressing a man who could be trusted to do justice and keep his word. As in India, also in it was in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the sprawling area known as the Middle East, over much of which Great Britain exercised a shadowy but none the less effective control in order to safeguard the Suez Canal and the Red Sea from domination by any other great power. Such fighting as the British Army had to undertake during the long Pax Britannica consisted therefore of colonial wars, that is to say, small campaigns against primitive rulers or tribal enemies who were usually valiant and cunning fighters, particularly in their own undeveloped countries, but had neither the cohesion of regular armies nor powerful modern armaments. The problem presented to British forces were often formidable, but they called upon solutions of special type, very different to the problems and answers of an orthodox large scale war. British soldiers tended subsequently toward a certain colonial war outlook, and it's hardly surprising that some unpleasant tactical shocks were suffered when they met with the Boers, a tough and austerely religious farming community, well, though not lavishly armed, whose European intelligence enabled them to learn and apply most up-to-date tactical methods to best advantage. So I'm just going to take a minute just take a break a minute. Just having a quick drink. Right. It was indeed fortunate for the British Army that this small but difficult war against a modernly equipped enemy took place before the larger ordeal of 1914. The lessons bitterly learned in South Africa, contrary to the belief of some armchair critics, were not wasted on the British Army, with the result that this contemptible little army, as Kaiser called it, gave von Kluck the unpleasant surprise at Mons. The gigantic empire won only partially by a series of colonial wars, but far more by personal influence of small leaven of fine men who held together in peace and prosperity by the same means. To hold down by force such a widespread empire and immense standing army would have been required. Great Britain could neither afford nor did she such an army because, apart from a very tiny group of malcontents, goodwill and contempt were the cement which held the empire together. Peoples who had recently been fighting bitterly against the British settled down almost as once as loyal and happy subjects of the Queen Empress. Among many examples of such metamorphoses, the case of the Punjab stands out. See chapter 8, page 89, for that, referring back to referring forward, which we'll get to a later date. British success in pacifying the civilizing such a large part of the hitherto uncivilized world is all the more remarkable if one considers the types of humanity that she had to subdue and civilize. It was just not a question of teaching gentle but untutored primitives such as Tibetans or South Sea Islanders. Among fighting races met with defeat by British arms in colonial wars were the Zulus, the Matabali, the Bantus of South Africa, the Masaya of the East Africa, the Somalis, the Hadawog, Hadendoa, and the fanatical dervishes of the Sudan, the Mawi of New Zealand, and the Ashantis in West Africa. The fighting races of India and her frontiers have already been mentioned. Sikhs, Pathans, Rajputs, Maharashtras, Mapalas, Rohillas, and others. All these ranked among the world's toughest and most pugnacious fighters. Yet these were the people who settled down peacefully and contentedly as members of the great empire. Because they would quickly learn to trust their white administrators, there were, in its true occasions, relapses. It could hardly have been otherwise. The lone white man on this civilizing work took his life into his hands and knew it. Often it was one of the most beloved and respected officials who fell to the knife of some religious fanatic. Mackinson, murdered in the heart of Peshawar uh, cantonment and Handyside, that intrepid constabulary officer of recent times, were examples of this, but on the whole, the system succeeded wherever applied to to the virile fighting races. Where it failed was in dealing with softer, more sophisticated people such as the Babus of Bengal or the semi-Europeanized members of the Egyptian middle classes. Ascetic and nominally non-violent Hindus were the breeding grounds for anti-British sentiment in India, such as in Africa it was the English-speaking and comparatively well-read doctors of some social economic faculty. These men often the product of missionary schools with their education capped by a degree in some American university or other, were counterparts of intellectual minorities that in all countries have formed the breeding grounds for revolution and unrest. In next chapter, we will see that in Great Britain herself, seeds of weakness and decay were taking root, first in the minds of a few left-wing intellectuals, and through them gradually undermine the moral and mental stability of the British ruling class.
Those
So,
American universities.
yeah, that is. Um, so what Richard Hilton is stating is that there were people in like wealthier, wealthier colonial British colonial families backgrounds were going to American universities or having an American style education, and the American mindset is what has formulated the this revolutions and decolonization to follow.
This just supports my earlier statement.
Yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, during the Second World War, and this is why Churchill was not very popular in our circles, is that you had you had FDR basically demanding decolonization, which was effectively handed over, on a silver platter. I mean, it, and then you had like this continued under Truman when FDR died, um, and the ultimate sort of betrayal was, of course, with the Suez crisis, which we'll probably get into, and this ultimately was the New Deal people, legacy of the New Deal Democrats types, to turn America into a global empire that we all love and know today.
A global revolutionary empire.
Yeah. And do you know what's really funny, Connor? This was something Iron Duke. I think it was Iron Duke on one of his last shows I was on. So apparently, during the 2003 invasion, or actually, I think it was the 2000. Sorry, was it 2001 invasion of Afghanistan?
Um,
2001, I think it was.
I thought it would be later than that. Or hold on.
Uh, I mean, I remember it vaguely. I remember it happened after it was all obviously all after 9/11. So I think it was.
Yeah, you're right. It was October 2001 to August 2021.
Yeah, yeah. Um, when the invasion happened, because it was you had the joint works of America and Britain. tag teaming. We had the Bush Blair Axis,
Axis
and
of
you
evil.
yeah, the Axis of evil, and during that time period, you had the British Foreign Office, I believe it was the Foreign Office, made said, well, we've got a legacy of the old Afghan monarchy, like the Crown Prince. What we'll do is when we invade, we'll kick out the Taliban and we'll put him in charge, and all the tribes that live in Afghanistan will feel happier with that because we will sort of return to natural hierarchy under Islamic law.
Yeah, I think I remember. I was listening to that episode.
Yeah, and this American State Department lady was like, "No, fuck that. We're gonna make it the next like like the 51st state.
Yep.
We're
Well,
gonna
we don't
make it."
have kings. Like we don't tolerate kings. I thought that's what Iron Duke said. It's like we don't tolerate
Yeah,
kings.
yeah, yeah. But we're gonna make it like a secular republic, and there's no history. No, we don't. We're not caring about history. This is a new start for Afghanistan. It's going to be liberal and gay, and everyone's going to be happy.
Look how that
Um,
turned out.
Yeah, and like literally, it's even more radical. I mean, just to give you a clue of how bad this was, the Taliban actually gained like strongholds in areas which they didn't even have before 9/11 and before the invasion. So, good job, guys. Good
Well,
good job, Bush and neocons. Great job. Great job.
Blair.
And Blair. But the funny thing is though, in the British model, I actually think it could have worked in some funny way if
Well,
they
yeah.
did install a king
Well, it's kind
that
of
was.
funny. I don't know if have you ever heard? Have you ever seen anything The West Wing?
Uh, I I I think I've seen clips of it on Facebook or something. People uploading clips of it. I know it's. Is that the one with um? Is it Martin Sheen?
Yeah. Well, there's a point when the British they have a British advisor come in because they're dealing with a conflict between Pakistan and India, and the this British advisor, of course, he's a lord and he's drunk, so of course,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
how we see you guys. Um, and they's like, when people were giving us a problem, we just make them a maharaja or something to make them satisfied.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Well, yeah, yeah. Yeah, somewhat true. Yeah, somewhat true. I mean, yes,
well,
it's
it's slightly a joke, but also but also slightly true. But the point is that like the American attitude is like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. We don't.
yeah, it's like no, no, we're going to deconstruct your civilization and make you like reform to republican values. And and the thing though is, it's this can manifest. I mean, this has manifest itself with communism versus capitalism, free market, America, open America, or um the free world as it is in more modern times versus the fanatical Islamic and the tyrannical world of like Putla and King Jong Il and people like that. But the problem is it. And even Richard Hilton at his time, he said that the way that America, even within your own continent, with like the natives, the Indians, it while military use was used, I mean, a great deal of pacifying was done via the dollar. It was done by economic means. Um,
We're all about the bribing, but not but on our like you have to agree to our way of life to be bribed. It's like we're going to bribe you and you're going to lose all sense of identity.
and yeah, and then you had like the extreme end, the other extreme, that of the Russian end was basically exterminate the entire population of this like Siberian tribe, and then put like a white Russian colony here. So that there are these multiple extremes of how it goes, and then you have Britain sort of in the middle that will do a bit of both, and I think the reason why he states the British power is the reason why it's empire, largely it was down to a few exceptional men. I mean, like Captain Cook, like Cecil Rhodes, people like that who had exceptional vision and took an interest in the local culture. And this isn't a dig at Americans, but I don't know outside North America in any of like the American expeditions in recent time, or even in probably in Vietnam or the region, of high ranking officers and military or government departments that actually took an interest in learning the culture, the history, the people that they were wanting to have influence over. Because,
Possibly MacArthur, but I don't know.
well, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, he had a close connection to the Philippines, but I mean the Philippines were, I mean, they were sort of conquered by America in the late 1800s, weren't they, with the Spanish-American War? So,
Yeah, but he
um,
also dealt with Japan after World War II.
um, didn't he want the emperor? Who was it that wanted? I thought he wanted the emperor to be deposed.
No, that was Truman.
That was Truman that wanted him to be
And
deposed, and
yeah, MacArthur was like, "Yeah, no, we're not gonna do that."
well, yeah, because that would have triggered one heck of a rebellion. Um,
Yeah,
um,
MacArthur hated Truman, so
yeah, okay, maybe MacArthur, but I mean, even still, the uh, the point is that in each of these cases, the mind of the British and other European powers, particularly the British in this, is non-ideological, accepting of how local power works. So they accepted that the Hindu, this race, this particular race of people, Hindus, this is how they govern. We accept it, and we're going to govern. We're going to have administrator over this province over you, and you guys can be Rajas. Then you have your Maharajas above you, and you're just going to govern in our name. And here's our guns, here's our army, here's our naval force. Accept it. And that was one side of it. And then, of course, you had the other side where it was straight up, we're going to settle on these uncharted lands like Australia and New Zealand, and we're going to um, govern as its extension of England. It's going to, because it's populated by English people, though in New Zealand it was a bit different because they had a more of a hostile population. And it's kind of interesting. You look at how the American Empire in the last century, how it's kind of like the opposite of that. Like there was, I can't really think of, I can't really think of a like I would say the kicking the Spanish out of Cuba was a definite American win in that sense, and the
not a
Philippines.
yeah, but a win, not a win for society.
Well, yeah, that's the problem. It's kind of like
A
what
win
what
for
do the American
America's not good for everybody else.
the thing is, when Britain won in India or Africa, it was kind of like a win for British people. Like there was that benefit, right? There
Yeah,
was a
with,
benefit. There was benefit for the British people, but
mm.
it's kind of like American intervention in Korea or Vietnam, or like in Latin America. I mean, okay, Reagan got some guys to bring some cocaine into the country, so that okay, it benefited a few smackheads in California. Okay, good job. But what else? What else did it produce?
Well, that's like Cuba. it only assisted one company basically, um, because they were able to, uh, and Hawaii, like just these businessmen, like nothing actually like nothing healthy, I guess it could you could say, just
Yeah,
capitalism. Like, yeah, the only thing that prospered was capitalism. Nothing else, nothing prospered for the actual people of the country.
yeah, and I mean, at least within the British context, businesses had to be done through a government structure which operated hard power. So, I mean, and yeah, and I will talk about this. There is, there are people who, when they say about the British Empire, is connected to the small hat people. You know, small hat power. You know what I mean, Connor, by that.
Yes, I know.
You know what I mean. And they like to bring up there's one particular family called the Sosins, who are Sephardic Iraqis, and they were involved in the British. So they came over to the UK, and then they they're quite well known in like the jewelry sectors in parts of London today. One of them's a lord, so they're quite well. They've been quite wealthy in society since then, and they made a name for themselves in India. But this is the thing: they found out, like many companies found out, is that number one, board of directors is it's literally a closed off group, it's cut off, so that they couldn't enter that way. And there was codes and rules and everything as Clive put in because of corruption and bribery. And so if there was a company that was out to do nefarious things, which a lot of companies are like today. So like a BlackRock who was there to subvert the population couldn't operate in like the company because they'd just be banned, they'd just be prevented and run out of business. And even if they tried to go over and above, the company would just use hard military force to put it down. And so there's kind of like this, the like the anti-corruption system in place was probably like the best anti-corruption system ever to be put in place was in India.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
there was no benefit to the British people until I started importing my excellent tea from Ceylon. Well, I mean, there were. I mean, funny enough, my local town there is merchant homes which were completely built by which would start off as merchant homes and then general houses on because of people who had shares or investments in the company or had business ties like um, cotton wool, that sort of connection there, and that was replicated all across the country and expanded over time. So yeah.
well, AI, I've got to get going soon. Uh,
Yeah, so just to quickly do you want to quickly summarize at all, like the what you thought of this chapter? Was anything that really stuck out for you?
I mean, it was
In
very organizational based. Very sort of, um, breaks down how Britain ruled its empire, how it came about, um, and it was basically, except for some Napoleonic interference, it only had to deal with people that were far below their any capabilities of defeating them, and yet the British managed their colonies out of uh, intelligence mostly than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't have a CIA which was, trying to replace memories or do some sick Manchurian candidate sort of shit on the population. um,
Indeed.
yeah, and for sure, and it's I mean, it is it is he's right. Richard Hill is right. The fact that they managed to um have control over the most violent and barbarous tribes and groups in human history who were feared throughout the world because of their nature by a small handful of men really shows a testament to their characters because and that's something which I think it a lot of people today when they look at the empire just can't fathom how it was possible and um it's like the same people who make up you that can't fathom that a small boy from low birth background could write the uh, excellent plays and literature which formulate large parts of the modern English language, and of course referencing William Shakespeare.
Yeah, it
A lot of
really
it,
it annoys me when people are like believe Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare.
yeah, because the argument is, well, how can a boy with like a sort of a basic education produce that sort of work? And the argument is, well, the basic education of the late 1500s
It's
was
really good.
equivalent was really really good. Like it isn't your bare basic like middle school crap that comes out today. So don't give me any of that. you know
Yeah, it's nonsense. It really bugs me that one of a really awesome author's like son or grandson. No, I think it's grandson is one of those like I can't remember who they say did it, but some lord. Do you know who it is?
the, yeah, the Earl of the Earl of Oxford, who,
Yeah.
which doesn't
Do
make
you know
sense because he died, he died before Macbeth was published, which referenced aspects of the Gunpowder Plot. So he wasn't alive for the Gunpowder Plot or Macbeth. So unless they got out a fucking Ouija board, I don't know how.
Yeah, it baffles me that intelligent people think that's a possibility.
And I've literally had arguments with one person who believed that. I said, "Well, okay, about that," and they got nothing. Yeah, do you know why? Because it's made up. Because you have. Oh, and this is the best bit. They then bring out the Tempest and say, "Oh, well, it's quite negative. That it's really out of character for Shakespeare's writing, so he must not." And it's like, if you guys ever like read it, had dedicated your time to any some authors change moods. There are some books where they talk about love stories, the other bits it's dark gothic horrors.
Like Tolkien is a perfect example. Read Lord of the Rings and then read Children of Hurin, and
I know,
you'll be like,
exactly.
"What
It's
the
full.
heck? This is so depressing." And then you'll be like, and it's like this is what pisses me off about like George R. R. Martin complaining about Tolkien. It's like, um, have you read anything else he's read or he's written?
Yeah, it's like, listen, you overweight turd. No one cares about the taxes of Gondor or the road maintenance.
Yeah, like anyone really wants to read that. It's not
Yeah,
even like it's not even like his writing really is all about taxes either. It's more about
if I
breasts.
if I would meet him in purpose, I would actually confront him on that and say, you know what? Where's the double chin? Where is the Lannister double chin? All this fucking incest that you put into your show. Where's the double chin? Show me the double chin and the six, the six fingers. You know, explain that away.
Indeed.
By the way, good night, 77th Brigade. I hope the British state has had enjoyment watching this, as much as I've had recording this. So good night. Um, don't plant any memories into my dreams at night.
I'd be worried.
Oh yeah, to be honest, at this point, if they want to take memories away, they can do that. At this point, it's so fucking cringe. Half the memories I've got now, it's okay. You do it, CIA, do it. I dare you. Um, God, I watched that Adam Curtis thing.
What's that?
To the Adam Curtis CIA stuff about like the the recent cigar stream. I actually watched the actual Adam Curtis documentary, and it's dark. It's really sick stuff. I don't usually like to use the word satanic, but it kind of is like just occultish levels of evil.
Okay. Well, I mean, the CIA is pretty bad, but we should wrap up.
We should wrap up. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, we'll do chapter 7 next time. I think chapter 7 is on the decay, um, and he's talked about the decay largely within Britain. So we're going to get into probably a lot of Carlian talking points at that point, like Bobus Higgins and people like that to the sausage baker. This should be fun. um, Anyway, thank you, Connor. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night, and we'll see you all next time.